Today we're going to talk about the flipped classroom model. This article went over a review of the key ideas and recommendations for practice. The authors are listed there on the screen. And let's get started. So the flipped classroom basics. Basically, the teacher pre-records the lectures and assigns them as homework to the students. And then when the students come to class, they have the opportunity to engage in a variety of in-class activities. The ones we're really going to focus on today are audience response and open-ended questions, pair and share activities, and then student presentations. A couple of other ones that were touched on in the article were class discussion and then individual or paired quizzes. Some examples of the audience response and open-ended questions. This one looked a lot at studies that were done using the clicker tests and seeing how using those tests correlated to improvements on test scores. So a student would listen to the lecture at home and then come to school, and during the class time they would be assessed on what they had listened to already at home using the clickers. And it showed that students who were assessed on the material regularly using the clicker tests scored better on the end assessment than those who just continued with other class activities. The next thing that the article looked at was a comparison between the clicker tests, which are relatively new-ish, and compared it to the use of flashcards. And the findings from that one were that clicker tests and flashcards scored about the same, which led to the conclusion that it's really the retrieving of information that plays a big role in student improvement and not so much the method of recall. So as long as students are having the opportunity to retrieve the information that's being learned, they are going to perform better at the end of the unit than if they wait until the very end to try and retrieve the information. Some examples of the pair and share activities. The first was pair discussions over discussion questions, and there were 3 different models for this. One was a rapid model where the students were given discussion questions and they had to answer it during that class period within a set amount of time. The next model was a more reflective approach, and so they had discussion questions, but the pair was given 3 to 5 class periods to complete it. So that could take the course of a week. And then the last one was proactive, so the pairs would discuss the questions and then have an opportunity to discuss it more with classmates. The pair discussion with clicker questions, which is that next bullet there, is very similar to the clicker questions that was mentioned on the previous slide. However, this one, the pairs were able to discuss either before answering or even after answering. And just the act of discussing it with your partner led to better understanding and being able to recall information better later in the class. And then the end of that section talked about this idea of looking at, are pairs too small? Should it be more small group discussion? How big is too big of a small group? And so it compared looking at how individuals did on a pretest, so without any discussion beforehand, just how they could do on their own, and then a small group discussion would be done, and then the size of the groups would vary, so you would have groups that were 2 to 3, and then you would have bigger groups of 5 to 10 that would be going, and then the results from the different groups were compared by the individual's score on a post-test. The findings of this were that all the groups did better at the end of the discussion. However, the individuals that were in smaller groups felt more like they could talk and have better discussion, whereas in the larger groups, it was more possible for one person to kind of dominate the group discussion, and other people not have a chance to have their voices heard. The next example we talked about was the student presentations, and this one followed the model of learning by teaching. So as students prepared to teach, they were simultaneously learning the material on a deeper level. So the steps of this were preparation, so preparing the lesson, and then presenting it to the class, and also having the students come up with a sort of student assessment. And then this was compared to a study of the expectations of students. And so it looked at two different groups of students, one of which was told that they were preparing for a test, and the second group was told that they were preparing to teach the same material to their classmates. The students who were preparing to take just a test did not perform as well on the test as the students who were preparing to teach the information, which just goes to show that when you are preparing to teach a lesson, you're actually learning the material better than if you're just trying to study for a test. So a kind of summary of the pros and cons. For the pros, there would definitely be more class time for assessments and labs, since all of the lecturing would be done out of class. The student presentations that we just mentioned can result in better understanding of the material and a deeper understanding of the material. And this also provides more opportunities for students to practice retrieving information, like we talked about earlier, that retrieving of information results in learning the material better. Some cons: this model could put low socioeconomic students or those who have slow or limited internet access at a disadvantage. If you have all of your videos uploaded to YouTube and a student can only watch it 5 seconds at a time, then they're going to be receiving the information kind of disjointed, and it can be hard to put it all together in a cohesive lesson. As a teacher, you wouldn't have any immediate feedback from students on lessons, so you wouldn't be able to see that half of the class isn't getting what you're saying, and be able to stop and find out where the hole is in their knowledge. You would have to wait until you got to class and then find out, oh, well, my students didn't understand half of what I was lecturing about, which could provide some challenges and cause more time to be devoted to that instead of being able to move forward. Even though this was addressed in the article that students don't necessarily learn worse from a computer, I do know that some students that I know don't learn as well from a computer. They have a hard time paying attention. Again, with slow internet access, that would be another example of where it would be really hard to to learn. Excuse me. And then that last con, pre-recorded lectures may not be as interactive for students, resulting in a loss of interest or them not being engaged in the material being presented. So some application of this, I could see myself using this as a tool for introducing a lab prior to doing it. So I could record myself kind of giving the lab procedures, going over safety for the lab, and things like that. And then when the class time came, the students would already be prepared for that. I could also see this being a tool that I could use for reviewing for a test, being able to put out a lecture over the materials that will be covered, and then having students come in the next class period being able to ask questions where they might not have the understanding that they thought that they did, and just making sure that providing another opportunity for that retrieval of information. And that is the flipped classroom. Thanks for listening.